it's not just that they're in Georgia. They're specifically in southern Georgia, making stops to many rural areas of the state, not necessarily going to the urban areas in which they can count on more Democratic support. What's the strategy here?
Well, the strategy is they know they can count on the urban areas. They need a little more help. So they're going to these areas where they're hoping they can chip off some, and then the total of the sums really show they made the correct play there. So by going to these rural areas, they're also saying, we want to speak to everyone and trying to broaden their base. Kailey?
Well, and of course, as they do so, they're trying to broaden the map, frankly, Angela. Georgia was a state in which we did not think Joe Biden was likely to win against Donald Trump. At least polling suggested it would be incredibly hard for him to do so. Harris is polling at least within the margin of error of Trump in Georgia now. New York Times Siena had them at 50-46, right ahead of the DNC. So how much of this is also forcing Trump and the Republicans and the RNC to spend money in a state they didn't necessarily think they would have to spend to spend many resources to defend?
Oh, absolutely. That is part of the Democrats' plan. They are sending their candidates to a state where Trump had an advantage when Biden was at the top of the ticket. But that has changed now that Kamala Harris, of course, is the candidate. The Republicans won. They want to win in Georgia. They want to win in Pennsylvania. They want to win in Wisconsin. And those are three states where they're spending a lot of time. But by sending the Democrats there right now to Georgia, the Republicans will have to return that volley at some point soon.
Well, J.D. Vance was spending time in Pennsylvania today. In fact, we actually heard from him there weighing in on Georgia and specifically the issue between former President Trump and Georgia Governor Brian Kemp.
Now, look, the president has some personal disagreements with Brian Kemp, and Brian Kemp has some personal disagreements with the president, but they're both big enough to put the country over personal interests.
It does seem, Angela, like we're seeing a concerted effort among Trump and those close to him to try to make nice with Kemp again, considering he is a popular governor in Georgia, and attacks on him don't necessarily land well.
Right. It's obviously a Trump ism to be enemies with somebody and then turn around and be friends. And we've certainly seen that with Brian Kemp. He was the attorney general in the state when Biden very narrowly won just about 12,000 votes in 2020. And, of course, oversaw that counting as well as the recounts in both of the Senate races that year. So he did not curry favor with Trump by that recount result. But at this point, Trump needs all the friends he can get, and he certainly wants to have the governor of a key state, who is a Republican, on his side and therefore needs to be friendly.
Well, of course, we've been paying attention to what Trump says about other members of the Republican Party. Julie, we also have been paying attention to what he says about the Democratic ticket. And both he and Vance have lobbied much criticism at Kamala Harris for not to this point sitting down for a big interview as the Democratic nominee. That will change tomorrow. While she's in Georgia, she's sitting down alongside Tim Walz for an interview with Dana Bash on CNN. That's going to air tomorrow night. How high stakes is that moment for her, considering she hasn't been very open with the press in the last 5 weeks?
It's a very high stakes moment for her. And she's also taking some criticism because she's not doing the interview alone. She is doing it with Tim Walz. However, at the end of the day, she is going to be the one that has to answer the questions, even if he's just sitting right beside her. So it's high stakes. It's the first time it is that situation. It is a 1-on-2. The only thing for her is, if she does not do well, she does have a debate around the corner. But on the flip side of that, if she does not do well, her answers could come up in that debate, Kailey.
Well, yeah, so all eyes will be on September 10th after this. Arguably, Angela, it is a chance for her to take corrective action, if you will, if she has missteps in this interview. But it does also mean perhaps that we're not going to have to wait to see her share a stage with Donald Trump to get more specifics on policy. She's talked in very broad strokes, did so as well last week at the DNC while we were there in Chicago. Is she going to get forced to drill down tomorrow?
She'll definitely have to go into more detail than she did last week, but she did go into more policy than a lot of people expected at her convention speech. She introduced herself and her biography, but she also certainly hit on a number of policy areas. One area she skipped at the convention that was definitely noticed was climate. Obviously, the energy industry was quite happy with those results, but on the other hand, the environmental side, who tend to support Democrats, were not quite so happy with her omission of climate during her remarks. So do expect her to be questioned in more detail on the policy areas, certainly climate, since that's a remaining question in the interview tomorrow. And then, of course, there will be more questions at the debate that go into specific policies.
Well, while we didn't hear much from Harris on climate at the DNC, we heard from her and many others about the idea of democracy and whether or not it would be secure if Donald Trump won the presidency in November, especially considering what happened in 2020 and his idea that he is still putting out there that he thinks he won that election. He, of course, factually did not. But earlier today, I spoke with the RNC co-chair, Lara Trump, and asked her about the questions Donald Trump has been raising about accepting the election results and election integrity overall. This is what she said.
We've gotten a lot of pushback from Democrat-run states, and it's been very challenging to get transparency in an issue where we really need transparency. But I believe that what we are doing right now at the RNC is going to further the notion that we do indeed have free, fair, and transparent elections. And so I think Donald Trump saying if this is a free election and a fair election and there's no funny business here is a perfectly legitimate thing to say.
But, Julie, to this point, we've had no proof of funny business in 2020, and there is no indication that there will be any funny business in this election.
Yeah, I mean, clearly they are sowing doubt on whether or not they are going to accept these election results. And listen, the former president has spent a lot of time on the campaign trail still talking about 2020. He's taken some criticism from fellow Republicans about not talking about the issues. But clearly they are trying to lay the groundwork to say if we find something that we don't think is right, we may be saying something about it later. So this is definitely leaving the door open for an issue that the former president continues to bring up on the campaign trail.
Well, and on the notion of election security, of course, earlier this month in Georgia, they adopted rules that essentially will make it easier, Angela, for election officials to either delay or not certify the results. How closely do we need to pay attention to what is happening in these individual states, especially the ones that could be decisive in determining the Electoral College?
We need to be following that very closely. Election integrity, and that comes from both sides. Election integrity is not necessarily just what Republicans say. It might be in terms of cheating that they think might happen. But election integrity means that people can get to the polls, that they can cast their absentee ballots, that the ballots are fairly counted. And one area that people are following closely is poll watchers. There have been many, many poll watchers hired by both parties, but more by Republicans to ostensibly make sure that access is open to voting, but Democrats fear that those same poll watchers may actually intimidate voters from showing up and casting their votes in person.